Hi guys and girls, I'm your host Phillip J. Watt and welcome back to the Redesigning Society podcast. Today's guest is Ellen Brown, who I interviewed last year for season 1 of the Redesigning Society podcast, and it was an elucidating discussion for me on several levels because Ellen is the founder of the Public Banking Institute and an author of over a dozen books, I think, and many articles around what's going on in public banking, universal basic income, medicine, and other areas. And she was able to help me understand some historic context for banking in Australia. And we might touch on that a little bit later. But she's the author of the best-selling novel, Web of Debt. And in 2013, which I do recommend that everybody get this book and read this book, is the Public Banking, the Public Bank Solution. Ellen is just a beautiful soul who is an activist within the world of money and banking, and it is so integral that we look at this systemically for how we move forward, because our money supply and our banking institutions and operationalizations should be sovereign and should be designed to benefit the people, the environment, and not the oligarchy or the corporate masters that have their hidden hands and hidden systems. They're in the big power pyramid behind the scenes. And for those, before we get started, let's just have a quick summary. For those who don't understand how money is created, if you go get a mortgage at a bank, they don't go get that money from a vault or from some other account. All they do is punch digits into a computer that goes into your account, and then it's actually called fractional reserve banking, but there are arguments that not even that exists these days, because fractional reserve banking means you have to have about 10% of the funds to lend out the 100%, but a lot of banks, especially particularly in Australia, that I've heard through my research, don't even have to have that 10% there. So essentially they're creating money out of nothing. They're punching digits into a computer. You pay that money back with interest. They keep the interest, and then they wipe that money from the system. Now, that is a process that I could do. Anybody can do. A community could do. A community can punch numbers in the computer, create some profits from that, and reinvest those profits back into social infrastructure, social programs, and any other areas and projects that help benefit the people and the environment. So that is something that's such a huge issue in our current era. For example, in Australia, we've got the big 4 banks, all of which have huge shareholder interest by the transnational banking conglomerates and corporate institutions, such as Goldman Sachs and all those other arms, all those other tentacles of this sort of monetary entrapment process. And we really need to start thinking about, well, why are we letting money being created by these people when it can be a process that we can do ourselves and actually get a lot of strong benefit from it? So, look, without further ado, I've had my little rant about how money needs to be taken back by the people, for the people. Ellen Brown, welcome back to the Redesigning Society podcast.
Thanks, Phillip. I'll join you in ranting.
Yes, it's such an important issue. Like, from my point of view, I'm fond of the idea of removing money completely as we evolve into an advanced species, because I believe that, I tend to believe, and I am open to evolution of my belief systems, but at this moment, I tend to believe that the actual process of having money in society facilitates the amplification of all this greed, selfishness, the whole profit-based system. It ends in cutthroat behavior. It's undermined our virtues and our values, and we've really lost the connection with each other. And I think a lot of intelligence for how we could design a system to actually create abundance for everybody, and in a way that is going to be conducive to the health of the environment and each other. But we're not at that stage. So that's my little bias starting off. I think hopefully in the future, that's probably, likely in the future, if we ever want to become an empowered species, I imagine that money is going to be completely removed. But That's not where we are. We're here right now in 2017. Money has been stolen. It's not a sovereign process. Banking has been stolen. It's not a community-based process. So where are we at, Ellen? What's going on in the world of public banks? And how have you seen the public's response to private versus public banking since the last time we spoke?
Well, I wrote the Public Bank Solution in 2013, or it was published in 2013. We founded the Public Banking Institute in 2011, and we had 20 states that had bills for publicly owned banks, but none of them got passed. So, we thought we were on a roll, and it would just be a year or two, and they'd be up and running. So here it is, 6 years later. But now we have a new wave of bills and interest and groups promoting the idea. And I think it's largely because people are getting it. It was a totally foreign concept before, the idea that banks actually create the money they lend, and that there's, a mathematical flaw in the system, that you've got to return that money to the system, or return it to the center if you're going to keep pumping it out, instead of siphoning off, as you say, that if you siphon off as much in interest as the principal of the loan over a 30-year period. Right now, that money goes into the speculative economy largely, so it's not recycled back into the local economy. If it's a public bank, you still have the same model, which is not actually a bad model. The idea that banks actually, in a way, they are creating money, but they need a borrower. So really what they are doing is they are the middleman that turns your promise to pay in the future into something you can spend now. So it's really a good system in the sense that it allows us to spend our future productivity. It's a credit system, debits and credits. The local model would be community currencies, where people actually do create credits and debits. You don't need to borrow it from a bank. You just, if you do something for another person, then let's say they always had the woman baking cookies in these examples, and the men do the mowing of lawns. But so let's say I bake cookies for you, and I get 5 credits and you have 5 debits, and then you mow Sam's lawn and you get your 5 credits back, and now Sam has 5 debits, and then he washes my car, and then I get my +5 goes to 0. So you just got pluses and minuses that pop up naturally, of money being created and destroyed all across the country all the time. I mean, that's where our system actually works now. It's not what people think, where it's a gold that you dig out of the ground and then it's there permanently, and then you've got a certain money supply that's always fixed. The money supply is up and down all the time. It comes and goes. Banks are creating money all across the system, and they're extinguishing money all across the system. But then the problem is this interest, which, in order to make that mathematically sustainable, you've got, the money needs to go back to the center before it comes out again, or otherwise you're going to create inflations or depressions, or but so where the money tends to go now is often to this other speculative economy. As Catherine Austin Fitts says, we have 2 economies, and they're both being supported by the productive economy. The second economy doesn't produce anything. It's just money making money. So wealthy people, they don't spend their money on consumer goods. I mean, how much consumer goods can you use? They put their money into investments, which are always growing. And at best, they're loans, which have to also get paid back. So in order to make the system sustainable, you want the money to go back to the center. On your idea of getting rid of money, the other possibility is to make money so transparent and so, to eliminate the middlemen, basically, so that and this is what blockchain and Bitcoin, I just went to spoke at a cryptocurrency conference, so, and also I'm writing on this now. I'm writing another book, which is almost done, called the coming revolution in banking, democratizing money in the digital age. So
can you repeat that title? I think there was just an audio issue when you said that.
Okay, the coming revolution in banking, democratizing money in the digital age. So basically about how our current system doesn't work, and they keep trying to fix it with regulation, but these too big to fail banks either will fail or we wind up supporting them, bailing them out, or doing bail-ins. So we need to go to a new system, and a new system is possible, and there are all sorts of developments on the horizon that make that system possible, largely digital, cryptocurrency type developments. My favorite, I think India is getting the closest to what I would consider a really interesting sort of ideal system. That I know there was all this scandal about the prime minister eliminating, I think, 85% of the cash, or recalled 85% of the cash and replaced it with either other cash, or you got digital money in your bank account. You were supposed to have a bank account. So I think most of it, 95% of it, did come in and get, so it wasn't actually lost, although it looked like it was going to be lost at first. But the reason they did that, they've been working on financial inclusion, trying to get everybody supported ever since they became an independent country in, I think, 1943, when they before that they'd had this huge famine that wiped out millions of people. And so in, I think, 1955, the State Bank, the Bank of India was made the State Bank of India, something like that. Anyway, in 1969, Indira Gandhi nationalized 14 of the biggest banks, not because they were bankrupt, but just because they weren't servicing the local communities. The poor people weren't getting serviced. I mean, can you imagine? It would be like nationalizing all of Wall Street and saying, sorry guys, you're not serving the people, so we're going to take you over as public utilities.
Trump, if you're a champion of the people, take note and do that, buddy.
Yeah, so that was pretty dramatic, and it did help a lot. They got many people got bank accounts and loans and so forth, but as late as 5 years ago, or 5.5 years ago or so, 50% of the population did not have IDs, so they couldn't get bank accounts. And the reason they didn't have IDs was that they weren't born in hospitals; they were poor. So the first, they had this 4-stage program, and the first step was they got everybody an ID. 1.1 billion out of 1.2 billion people now have these IDs based on retinal scans and fingerprints. So you can tell for sure who the person is. I mean, it's even better than what we use, which is like social security numbers, which can be stolen, etc. You can't really fake your retinal scan. And then they made bank accounts really easy to get, or opened up the whole bank account thing. And then they developed this system of peer-to-peer lending, where you could use your cell phone and transfer money to somebody else's cell phone just with a phone number. You didn't need to go through a bank. I mean, I assume that, actually, I need to look into this further. I don't know if the money comes from your bank or from the phone company. The way they do it in Kenya is that it just goes on your phone bill. So you're basically transferring, I mean, it's just more of a debt on your phone bill, and then you pay it at the end of the month. So it's just like paying your credit card at the end of the month, but it's on your phone. You don't need to have a bank account or credit approved by a credit card company. I mean, I assume you have to have your credit approved in some way. I'm not sure. I mean, the phone company must. Maybe they fire you, or they, stop your account if you don't pay. I suppose that's what the leverage is. And then the really cool thing was this thing called India Stack, where it's digital currency, or it's a stack, whatever a stack is in computer algorithm programming talk. It's where you've got all your information. So you can have your medical information, for example, and you can share it with your doctor or not. You have total control over who gets to see what on your stack. But you would also have your financial information. So you can have in there that you paid your utility bill every month or whatever. So you can show that you have not defaulted on anything and that you have a credit history of some sort. And so now these little like one person vendors on a street corner can put in their phone that they want to get a $500 loan, and different lenders will come into the phone with their what their offer is, what, you know, how much they'll lend and at what interest rate, and then the little vendor can choose which one she likes, and they trust the system because it's all, you know, they've got all the data there, just like a bank would have. Or it could be a bank, but it needn't be a bank. It can be just a peer-to-peer loan. So that's almost to the point of a community currency on a digital system, which I think would be ideal. If we could in some way monetize our own promises to repay, turn our own future credit, or our own credit, which is our own future ability to pay, into something we can spend now without giving over control to big Wall Street banks that siphon off profits, then we would have a viable, workable system. And they've gotten very close. The reason you need a credit system as opposed to like gold that you dig out of the ground is that, as we've seen for hundreds of years, gold is too limited. You wind up with depressions when there's not enough money to go around. You need to advance the credit first. So merchants everywhere, or whatever, little businesses, they pay their workers and materials first before they have a product to sell. And then they have to wait probably 30 days or 90 days or whatever after that before they get paid. So there's a period you've got to put out before you get it back. And that's what a credit system is. And it seems to me that's what our whole money system is. It's a credit system, not a thing. Money is not a thing. It's a flow. It's credits and debits.
The suspicion within the conspiratorial sort of community, I guess, would be if we're going to a cashless, digitized economy, and that sort of relates to cryptocurrencies as well. There's allegations that either cryptocurrencies was created by the control system, and that's their process of moving to a new system while still maintaining some level of control. The other one is that it's been co-opted, was originally created by a genuine, Satoshi was a genuine interest for decentralizing and taking back power of the money supply. And the other one is that it really is an alternative that the central banking cartel really can't get their hands on, and it's going to be an important measure for decentralizing our current system and moving into a more sovereign-based society for individuals and communities. I'm hoping it's the latter, but the same goes with India. If they're digitizing and sucking people into a digital system, the allegation is that they've got way too much control, especially if they're using eyes, retina scanners and fingerprints. And we really need to be trusting these technocrats and the oligarchs and the people who control the system, if that's the allegation at least, if we're going to participate in it. What do you say about the digitization of money and all this sort of stuff? Is there a big risk that if the, let's call them the money makers or the hidden hand, if they don't like your activities, they can just switch you off and then you're completely left in the dark? What would you say to that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that's what everybody thinks, and that does sound like a risk. But in the U.S., I mean, India is totally different, where most of the economy was virtually a cash economy. In the U.S., 95% of the economy is already digital. Only 5% of the money supply is coins and paper dollar bills. And there would be no reason to get rid of those coins and dollar bills. You want to keep something in case your computer breaks or your phone runs out of electricity or something. So just like now, and in fact, you could still do it on credit cards. You know, you wouldn't have to necessarily use your phone in case your phone did die. But credit cards are also a digital system. So the digital system we have now is controlled by banks, and they're sucking out the profits. So if we had agreed that ideally we want a government that's our government, we want a community. You're talking about this idealized future where we have no money. I would see an idealized future where we all actually have sort of ESP, like supposedly we had, I don't know, before the flood, is what you read at one, or like the Aborigines, where, you know, they actually can feel the bodies of their tribe, like they actually know that they're all one, and so they don't cheat. But another way to not cheat is to have a system, a cryptocurrency with built-in smart contracts that you can't cheat on. In other words, they're totally transparent. The money is there and it transfers, and you know, they have a way to, just like the reason that we trust banks now is that, if you go to the market and you try to write out an IOU, your grocer won't take it. But if you go to the bank and write out your IOU, the bank will take it because they know where to find you. They know how to tap into your bank account, or, you know, maybe they know how to foreclose on your home or your car or whatever. They've got they've got the court system, they've got contracts, so they've got ways of collecting. So the system is secure to them, secure enough to trust you that you will pay the thing back. And so basically what you have done is swap your credit, your future promise to pay, for the bank's credit. And the grocer will take the bank's credit. This thing we call money that you write into your checkbook is really just bank credit. In fact, I think maybe I explained before where that came from, but it's pretty interesting that originally, you know, the goldsmiths had kept the gold, and then they would write out receipts for the gold, which were traded. It was more convenient to trade these receipts than to trade gold. It was not so heavy and it was safer. So the goldsmiths quickly discovered they could lend like 10 times as many of these receipts as they actually had gold to back them, except periodically there would be bank runs when people found out that they didn't have the gold. And then in the mid-19th century in the U.S., there was the National Bank Act, which imposed, so then banks started doing that, and but it was also backed by gold, and they would write their own banknotes that had their own names on them. So everybody knew they were issuing their own money. It was a banknote a note is a promissory note. So it was a promissory note from the bank to pay. Like they didn't give you the gold. They said, if you come to get the gold, we'll come up with it. And then the National Bank Act imposed a 10% tax on these banknotes because they were trying to get everybody to join the federal system. But many banks, instead of joining the federal system, what they did was they no longer actually issued banknotes. They just gave you a checkbook. So they would write the numbers into your account that they would have printed banknotes and given to you. They write that number into your account. Then you basically are writing your own banknote when you write the check. So it's a check drawn on the bank. So the bank has promised to pay, backed by your promise to pay, because they're going to collect from you, and they'll take the risk that you're not going to pay. And for that, they'll collect interest. So we've kind of lost that whole history, but it really is now and now I've forgotten the point I was making. Anyway.
That's all right. Look, I love it. I really wanted to track back to that statement about an idealized future of telepathy and subtle communication techniques. Like, wow, it's a great vision. We live in a left brain dominant society where the holistic activity of the physiology of the human body isn't being utilized. We've lost a lot of our instinct and our intuitive capacity through ongoing sort of generation and multi-generation conditioning to be sucked into this particular state of mind, state of perspective, where we are separate, where we are just a bunch of material atoms that form to create this robot that a lot of people do act like. They're just robotic responses to the world at large. But fortunately, there are so many other more empowered people who are tapping more into the subtle energies, who are more advanced in their understanding of their philosophical understanding of their connection, be it ecologically, metaphysically, quantum physically. There's all these ways we can view the connection of life, even just through just reverence in and of itself. But if we look at the animal kingdom and what they're capable of in terms of their sensory apparatus and the way that they interact with their environment, we have lost a lot of the magic, the capacity that we do have as humans, because we are too busy working 9 to 5, 2 parents just to pay off a mortgage and get the kids into a good indoctrination system, or school, should I say? And that's exactly right. As we do move forward, when we remove these sorts of challenges, all this suffering is widespread. Stress, sadness, sickness, addiction, it's just everywhere. People aren't content. They've got no idea what real inner peace is even looks like. And that means if our Maslow's hierarchy of needs aren't being met, we're too distracted to look at what sort of magical powers we do have. So I look forward to the day we are superhumans, Ellen.
Right. Agreed. That's a concept from biomimicry, that there are superorganisms with like ants and bees, where they're basically acting as one hive. They're all in communication with each other, and that we also are a superorganism, or we're a superorganism in the making, because we haven't quite got our antennas tuned in yet. But at some point, in order to make the whole system work efficiently, we have to all get it that we're all cells in a single body. I mean, if you think about your cells and the blood, if you consider the bloodstream the money system, then the cells don't take more blood than they need, or more whatever minerals that they need. So they all know what they need, and they all know that the others need. I mean, there's not, you know what I'm saying. Anyway, we want to operate like a single body if we're going to be an efficient superorganism. And for that, we need to acknowledge and get it that we're all one.
Yes, we're all one and we're all separate. I'm not a fan of the New Age concept that, all we are is this connected, and we should kill the ego and kill the personality or the sense of self, and just be this connected body in the system. But we are separate, and we should celebrate our separateness. We should celebrate our capacity to be living a unique life, a sort of individual snapshot of infinite consciousness. That's an important element, an important layer of truth that we should be celebrating. But that is not the only layer. There is the more fundamental layer of being interconnected and interdependent, not just with human life and through this collective unconscious that Jung spoke of, but also ecologically as well, with our fellow natural systems, with our fellow animals. And that's the sort of process that we really are so disrespecting on so many levels. The planet will be fine. She's a superorganism, herself, part of a super system, the solar system, the galaxy, and the universe itself. But she's been through a lot of turmoil over her time. Doesn't matter what we throw at her, she'll be fine. But the natural systems on her will take so long to recover, and we might lose out on so much of them if we don't start respecting them and taking care of them in the way that, as you mentioned, the ancient or traditional peoples used to do themselves. So, yes, that's an exciting tangent, Ellen, that I wasn't expecting to talk about in this discussion.
Well, you're right. I shouldn't have said all one. Like, I didn't mean like we have to bow to the wishes of everybody else. I mean, of course we do, but yeah, I agreed. We're all like cells in a body. In other words, we're all individuals, which, when you invited me to do this interview, you were mentioning an article I just did on universal basic income. So that would be the idea of universal basic income, to give everybody the basic subsistence level money, enough to, for food and shelter and all that stuff, so that we could manifest our true potentials. So we'd actually be doing individual things instead of working for the man, as they say, working a 9-to-5 job or an 8-to-6 job or whatever, where you don't really, I read somewhere that something like 80% of people don't like their jobs.
And 80% of, I think it was David Gruber who calculated that 80% of the jobs are actually adding no value to the economy or society in and of itself. So there's all this time being wasted, which could be invested in creative endeavors and just taking a step back, actually, because the argument against UBI, basic income, which is several, one of which is that it's going to force people into the control system and people are getting dependent on that welfare system, et cetera, et cetera. But another one is that it's human nature to be lazy and to not be creative and just to, not participate in their own life. And I think that is a product of the environment, a product of the system. I think when you help people to step into their authenticity, they want to feel their creativity, they want to express their creativity through whatever mechanism it is. And if they've got the opportunity, because a lot of their monetary base is sorted, then they will look for avenues to express their creativity, whether or not it's through a discipline such as science or academia or farming. It doesn't really matter. If we give people the opportunity to express themselves in healthy and productive ways and make it easy for them, I do believe the majority of people would take that opportunity. So before we get into the UBI, because that's really important, how does the cryptocurrency world, based on your experience within that conference that you spoke of, how do they respond to things like public banking? And I know they didn't have a great response to the basic income, which I've been a fan of for quite some time. Personally, I think that it seems like a good idea. But then there are the allegations that the basic income is part of the control system. They're trying to suck people into that. And as I mentioned before, it makes people more dependent on the system. But it doesn't seem they had a great response. They think it's going to cause inflation or hyperinflation in the cryptocurrency community. So what's their response to public banking? That building that more blockchain experience, peer-to-peer of money lending and exchange, etc., as well as the basic income. I know that's a really big question, Ellen, and I probably won't be able to speak for the next 20 minutes while you discuss it.
Sorry. Okay. So, well, I was actually rather surprised to be invited because these tend to be Austrian, libertarian, gold bug type. Bitcoin is not gold. I mean, they have a competition going with the actual gold bugs, but it's based on the same system. The idea that you have to mine this cryptocurrency, it's very difficult to mine. And then once it's in the system, you've got to track it from point to point to point. It never goes away. And you've got to have this distributed ledger where it's on millions of computers around the world. Every time a transaction changes, all these millions of computers change. But the problem is, first of all, it's extremely expensive. I guess I read that a single transaction uses as much electricity on all those computers as a household uses in a day, or as for all the transactions at once, it's as much electricity as Ireland uses. So that's a lot of electricity, and it's very slow. It already can take up to an hour. And if you really had it, and that's for 0.02% of the M2 money supply, or amount of money equivalent to that. If you multiply that up by 500, you'd be standing in line for days to get your coffee. If it was actually the national currency, which is what some people want to do, replace the national currency with this private currency. So it's a totally different model than public banking or community currencies, or the credit debit system, or the banking system we have now, which is a credit debit system, only it's a control system where the control is not we're not in control. But anyway, it is a credit debit system, not a gold system anymore. So, so it's a different model, and they're concerned about, so anyway, I was invited to give a PowerPoint on public banking, and I was on 4 different panels, which I was surprised. Maybe I was there for the counterpoint, to have some opposition to what everybody else is going to agree on. But so it was a really interesting conference, and all the other panels were fine, but that particular one on UBI, I was shocked to see so many people opposed to the concept, because where I come from, I mean, the public banking world, it's the Occupy Wall Street crowd, and the dispossessed that's lost their homes to big banks and so forth. So those are all people that think UBI is a great idea. And this crowd were all pretty wealthy, I would say. They dressed well anyway. And of course, aspirin is outrageously expensive. And it was this sense of that, well, who's going to pay for it, for one thing, that it would mean their taxes would go up to pay for everybody else. But that's not the point. I mean, so that's what I just wrote an article about. I tried to make this argument on the panel, but, it's hard to say these things. It's a lot easier to write it out when you've got links and numbers. And so it wouldn't cost, you could just issue the UBI, just like quantitative easing, just have the central bank issue it. It could be debit cards and everybody gets them.
They call that qualitative, qualitative easing, don't they? Instead of quantitative easing? Yep.
Right. Qualitative, because it's going to actually go into the real economy, not just stop at the reserve accounts of banks. So the reason it would not be, so the issue is it's either going to create inflation if you let the central bank do it, or it's going to cost in taxes, or you're going to have to slash programs, which everybody's opposed to. But so my argument is it wouldn't cause inflation if you let the central bank do it. And the reason is the velocity of money. That money changes hands. In a good economy, it changes hands 7 times. So each person who gets that money is going to pay taxes on it. Or some people don't like the idea of taxes, going back to the central government. Another way to do it is if it was actually a digital currency. I read somebody made this argument, which looked good to me. It's something like, I believe he said there were 5 trillion transactions daily. I don't know. Anyway, there are a lot, an unbelievable amount of transactions going on in the world. If you count all the speculative things happening and, the currency exchanges, etc. So if every one of those transactions, you just shaved a little bit off the, it wouldn't necessarily be a tax. It wouldn't have to go back to the government. You just shrink the money supply a teeny bit every time it trades. Then eventually it would go to 0 and you could put that money out there again. Or there was the Wargel experience. Wargel, I don't know how you say it, the Austrian town in the 1930s. I don't know if you've read about that, where that they were suffering through the Great Depression. And so the mayor got this bright idea of just printing some money and giving it to people. And then there was a stamp tax. You had to put a stamp on it, buy a stamp and put it on this paper money every month. So eventually the stamps cost as much as the paper face value of the money. So if in effect, it all went back to the government. And then they could do it over and over again. And this totally stimulated the economy. You've got to get the money out there. Again, that's the nature of a credit debit system. You've got to get the money out there flowing in order to create the demand so that producers will produce, so that, you've got to have somebody to buy the products before producers are going to produce them. And it's all run on credit. So credit is basically what we're talking about. Give the people the credit to buy the stuff, and that will generate more taxes, which will go back to the government. And if it changes hands 7 times, I mean, you could actually do a computer program that would make it come out just right, so that the money would disappear in X amount of time, and then you could issue it all over again, like annually. Or you could even make the debit cards just disappear at the end of the year, and then you start all over again. Anyway, it can be done without creating inflation, and many authorities have said so, whom I cited in my in my article.
Yeah, well, look, it really comes down to that sovereignty thing again, where we have a system right now where it's designed to benefit the select few. People need to get through this through their heads and their hearts and really understand that it is a scam. The system has been turned into a scam, not just monetarily, but pharmaceutically. The media is just a propaganda outlet for that particular system, and the government has been turned into a corporatocracy where a deep alliance with banking and other massive monolithic multinationals are really controlling macro policy design, and we get a left-right duopoly, a left-right tyranny, two-party tyranny, that gives us the illusion of choice, but really we're only choosing around micro policies, the things that really don't matter when it comes to fundamentally shifting our system into a more sovereign-based, authentic, and abundance-producing process that benefits the people and the environment. For example, in Australia, we've got there's a website called Bank Reform Now. I really encourage people in Australia to follow Bank Reform Now. They have some great information about how we operate through our government and how it connects to the government. And they've just released that that's a huge majority of the senators and members of parliaments are members for banks. There's 76 senators, 150 member of parliaments, and the majority being members of banks. And that is a huge conflict of interest when the banking institutions and system is such a detriment to the people and the environment that we really should that should be a priority when it comes to a discussion, debate within our society. We really need to look at how this system is really, as you said, sucking those interests into the speculative economy, and it's not really helping the Main Street economy. It's designed to increase the wealth of the Wall Street economy. Now, going back to automation, I don't know if I had a point with all that. I think I was just on rant mode. But the universal basic income is an argument or a new model to deal with the automation of a lot of our jobs and a lot of our workforce, such as computers, AI, so artificial intelligence or autonomic intelligence, robotics, and other forms of machinery are going to take over a huge portion of the workforce. In Australia, it was predicted, I think, around 2 or 3 years ago by a cost that we, within the next 10 years, are going to lose 40% of our jobs to automation. And the argument is that there aren't going to be enough new disciplines or careers or areas of expertise where human activity is required. So suddenly there's going to be all these people out of work, and they're not going to be able to contribute to the economy and to contribute to increasing their own not just being able to survive, but also survive. So that's where a UBI argument comes in. You've really nailed some of the technicalities to it all, because it really does become confusing when we start looking at how the actual monetary system works and the ebb and flow of money and cash and credit and debt and all the rest of it. And it's very hard for the layman, including myself, to get my head around. So when it comes to those technical details, it seems that you've got that pretty worked out. You've got a solid argument for why UBI will not end up in hyperinflation. So have you received a response from the cryptocurrency world and that sort of anarchist sort of mentality, that community, in response to your article?
I know I got a lot of feedback, but I can't remember getting any. No, I think I'm right.
You think you're right? Yes. Well, look, all these solutions need to be considered. I'm very much over this bias that exists within not just the independent media, but independent thinkers around, well, it needs to be this way, it needs to be that way. There's the only one true solution to this system. And I think there's, I run on the many truths theory and the many approaches theory. I think we should be considering all options. We should try not to hinge our beliefs into dogmatic systems and really open ourselves up to all types of potential solutions. I think the human species is so creative and ingenious. I think the blockchain, hopefully, that's a reflection of our ingenuity. I think that's how it's pronounced. Forgive me, it's early morning here, but yeah, there is so much potential for humanity, and there's so many potential solutions that I really think that we should be looking at all of them, putting them all on the table, and trying. I think we should trial lots of different processes. For example, Michael Tellinger's Ubuntu contributionism one small town model is being implemented in a small town in Canada called North Frontenac. The process is to help give the people who contribute 3 hours a week voluntarily to this program will get free food and free electricity in response. And it's designed to increase community sovereignty and individual sovereignty in a way that builds abundance within that community. Now, a lot of people have adverse reaction to that. They think it starts socialism or communism or something like that. But I really think that we should be supporting these sorts of initiatives, just at least trialing them, see how they go, and watch what the effect is. And the same is with universal basic income. It has been trialled, hasn't it? So let's talk about a little bit about the successes of a basic income so far.
Right. Well, there have been a number of trials going back probably almost a century, going back to Richard Nixon, at least. I mean, I know that Hayek, what was his first name? Anyway, there are actually libertarian gold bug type people who were in favor of a UBI. Anyway, there was a trial that Richard Nixon sponsored that showed that the people did not become lazy. They didn't quit their jobs. They just, they were able to do more things with their money, and they got more education. There have been trials in Canada, and there have been pretty large trials in India. In India, where people come from nothing, I mean, they get really excited about this, and it's like their first opportunity to make some money of their own and actually do what they really want to do. So they're very, they become entrepreneurs, they get more education, their health improves, less use of social, whatever, social benefits. And so overall, they are more productive. They don't sit around smoking dope or drinking or whatever and wasting their time. I think the reason that people get that perception, for example, we have a lot of homeless here. Well, of course, the homeless are depressed, and what are they going to do with their time? They don't have degrees, they can't get jobs. So what are they going to do? Sit around and write poetry? Probably not. They're scrambling around looking for food. Or if they, so anyway, they probably are hopeless, and therefore they get into drugs or something like that. Or even people who are wealthy and supported who get into bad lifestyles. It's still because they've, I don't know, maybe have bad home lives or something. Anyway, these studies show that when you give people a little extra income, that they actually do productive things with it.
Yeah, look, it's a lot of that is based on the fact that there's so much trauma, disconnection, disempowerment. People aren't feeling connected and with themselves, their communities, reality at large. They've lost their sense of purpose and hope, as you said. And of course, we are absolutely permeated, as I mentioned earlier, with that sickness and sadness and stress and addiction and whatnot. So, of course, there's going to be dysfunctional and unproductive behaviours that occur in response to that, because people aren't in a position to look after themselves properly, because they haven't learned that, and they certainly haven't. Don't have access to medicines that actually are natural, sort of non-toxic, and actual beneficial to curing the issue. That also relates to the initiation process that we've lost in tribes and communities. We've lost our elders. We've lost that on a huge scale. I shouldn't say we haven't completely lost it, of course. There's lots of brilliant minds and hearts that exist in society are helping their tribe or the collective tribe called humanity to re-empower themselves, to re-enchant the world, to reconnect with all these beautiful layers of the self. But yeah, of course, during that process, there's going to be so much sort of dysfunctional behaviors that we measure, and people just say, well, that's human nature. Of course, it's human nature to have an emotional spectrum, to sometimes feel the sadness, to sometimes feel the happiness, the roller coaster of life. Of course, it's a natural aspect to be selfish. You need to love thyself to love others. You need to respect yourself to respect others. There's all that process of you need to take care of yourself, and sometimes that can be amplified so bad it manifests as greed, excessive competition, jealousy, all those things that are very natural, but it's completely skewed in this day and age by a system that encourages those qualities, or I don't know if I should call them qualities, but those characteristics to be at the forefront. So we see a lot of that. And that's where I was referring back to this moneyless society, in the sense, if you take out the mechanism which amplifies that process, maybe it could result in a more advanced future for humanity. But as I said, I'm more than open to looking at what other potential solutions there are. It might be a step-by-step process. Maybe that's where we'll end up one day. And in the more short and midterm future, we'll be looking at blockchain technologies and peer-to-peer lending and all this sort of stuff. So that's really, really exciting. I want to just quickly go back, and I think I had a question through that process, but once again, I've gone on a rant and lost it, Ellen, so my apologies. You referred to the transaction tax before, and it was going to be one of my questions. So I'm glad you did speak to that. Now, the transaction tax, I was part of a independent sort of political party called the Australian Sovereignty Party with Daniel Huppert. For those who are interested in some of those amazing policies that Daniel and his team created, you can check out the interview on season 1 of my podcast. But he talked about the transaction tax. A lot of people think that, not a lot of people, I think it's pretty obvious that if we were to institute something like that, you'd lose so many different jobs in the economy, including accountants and tax agents and all the rest of it. You'd lose so many people from the bureaucracies, or you don't need all these people working for the government to process this sort of stuff. But it does seem logical, because what it does is it gets that Wall Street economy involved in the process of contributing back to the economy. So is that a fair enough analysis of what a transaction tax would result with?
Yes, well, there are some problems with it. You would basically destroy the banking system. We would not have the current banking system, but that's okay with me. I mean, then we go to turn all the banks into public utilities. But the way they work right now, they lend money they don't have, and then if the borrower and the depositors come for their money at the same time, then so basically they get deposits in, or anyway, as you point out, they lend out they have a lot more demands on their pool of money than they actually have money. So when they can't meet the demands, then they borrow on the repo market, or from the shadow banking system, or from other banks at a very low interest rate. So the repo market is an overnight trade at 0.00 whatever percent. And if you imposed a transaction tax across the board as some people are proposing, like 0.1%, all those trades wouldn't happen, because it wouldn't be worth the while of the lenders. But there's another way to work a banking system. I mean, you don't have to do the banking system that way, but it would be I can see where it would be quite traumatic. I mean, it would shake up the economy to impose a transaction tax of whatever size, unless it was very minuscule. But it definitely has potential worth thinking about. I was going to say one other thing on the UBI, that one reason people who take welfare aren't industrious, don't get jobs, is that their welfare goes down as their income goes up. So if you were to so that's the nature of a UBI, universal basic income, is that everybody gets it and they all get the same. So first of all, you save a whole lot of money on just the administration of welfare, and you do encourage people to still continue working. So.
Yeah, well, the incentive is still there, isn't it? But the incentive's taken away. Excuse me. The incentive's taken away if, as you said, the money comes down as you sort of start contributing to employment.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, okay, so let's track back to one of my earlier rants. We're talking about the people with the sickness, and you've written a book called Forbidden Medicine. I think that's what it was. I don't have it in front of me, Forbidden Medicine. And in it you discuss what the scam of the pharmaceutical monopolies, how they've painted slight variations to bacteria and plants, which is basically what most of the pharmaceuticals are. Is it's plant-based and bacterially based, but it could be synthetically created in a lab or slightly twisted to be able to patent it. But they have suppressed natural medicines for so long, including cannabis, an amazingly potent plant. We do have an endocannabinoid system within our bodies, responds amazingly. We've got the to cannabis, we've got receptors to absorb those cannabinoids to help facilitate whatever healing and also developmental needs that we might have. So what's going on in the world of forbidden medicine, Ellen?
Well, you could make a case. I mean, I love a good conspiracy theory, so I explore those a lot. That cannabis balances the system, and that they actually don't want us to be too. I mean, the reason it's been suppressed for so long is that it's such a great medicine, and it's competing with pharmaceuticals. This pharmaceutical industry got the upper hand in like 100 years ago, or more than 100 years ago. And so cannabis is, I mean, now there's all kinds of research showing that cannabis can cure all sorts of things, but it's difficult to do this research because it's actually illegal to obtain what you need in order to do the research. So it makes no sense that it's so suppressed. How could it possibly be a class 1 controlled substance that is lethal and has no therapeutic value? That's what class 1 is.
And that's on the federal level of the U.S. government. Yeah. Is that correct?
Right. And yet on the state level, many states have approved it not only for health reasons, but have approved it for everyone. So they're suppressing it for some other reason than the fact that it's, I mean, it hasn't even caused deaths, unlike many things that are illegal, like aspirin or,
well, look at the opioid crisis at the moment in America and all across the Western world.
Yeah. And you've got a good point about people taking these drugs that for depression and so forth. That's supposedly a major cause of violence, suicides and homicides. We could get rid of this whole wave of violence that we have going on, arguably, that these people are not totally balanced. It's not all terrorists. These are people that are just frustrated and unhappy and taking it out on strangers. And if you got people off those drugs, they would be a lot more industrious. They wouldn't be relying on these drugs that sort of blot out their brains.
Yes, and going back to your conspiratorial sort of allegation of not having the body in balance and the powers that be don't want that, well, look, it's pretty obvious that they're not trying to help us to be an authentic, harmonious being. We've got an indoctrination system called education, which is left brain dominant. It's repeat and it's learn and repeat. All you're doing is regurgitating information that the status quo is designed to ensure that they're maintained and not challenged. So you've got a compartmentalized academia, scientific community. People are only thinking within their own little expertise. There isn't the holistic thinking that you need to become that balanced being. And certainly it's not just happening through education, but also through media and medicine, and also food. Food is medicine. It's preventative health, it's prescriptive health, and our food supply is tainted as well. So we're in an unbelievably challenging environment to really have that balance, aren't we?
Right. And I think the whole system is geared toward making us into workers and working for someone else. They're certainly not, it's not geared for self-realization, self-development like it used to be. I mean, it used to be, my first degree was in English. I was interested in the poetry. I like poetry and novels and stuff, but now they don't encourage you to learn any of those social things. Now it's all jobs that you can sell to big business. So arguably that's another reason for so I've read, for blocking out the cannabis, the part that actually does affect your mind, that it frees you into those other realms that they don't really want us to go.
Well, we should be learning to explore our consciousness from an early age. We do so through dreaming, but we can do so through other techniques such as more natural ones, meditation, drumming, chanting, dancing, singing, hanging out with your tribe around the fire and having a good old crack at connecting with the stars. But then there also are the psychotropics. It is arguable that magic mushrooms or psilocybin, I think that's how it's pronounced, is a facilitator or a generator of the art. It helped evolve art out of the culture of humans when they started taking it back in what our sort of known history is, at least in the tribal history. But there's all these other developmental compounds that we can be utilizing, not just cannabis, but MDMA, the magic mushrooms, obviously, all part of the tryptamine family, as well as DMT, and some of its more practical or sort of plant-based processes such as ayahuasca. But it isn't just for expanding one's mind and consciousness and exploring the metaphysics and the world of the esoteric and non-physical realms, the spirit realms, the realm of connection, symbolism, synchronicity. But it's also great for healing. There's been so many clinical trials over the last 50 years, which have started to be re-emerged recently, thank God. For MDMA, for example, which has a very strong strike rate at curing PTSD, which is infamously known as difficult to cure. Then there's also, as I said, magic mushrooms. It's shown to have all those healing techniques, and I know from personal experience how important, and I don't recommend this because everybody's up at their own stage of their journey, and initiations have been lost, and we really need guidance around these experiences of altered states of consciousness. But I know so that's my disclaimer, but my personal experience, I've had so many healing explosions through my participation in particular compounds. So all of those sorts of things have been illegalized and suppressed and demonized for so many years, because they are effective at actually dealing with the issue. If you're curing your customers, then they're no longer a customer from a pharmaceutical perspective. But also because do we want free thinkers who are going to question the system?
Exactly. So I think, or I've read that one reason that cannabinoids are so effective in healing things is that that stress causes, like virtually every disease has stress as a component of it. Stress is a left brain thing. It actually comes from the left brain, where you've got your cholesterol converted to progesterone, which is diverted into cortisol, the stress hormone. So it takes away from the other hormones that balance up your system. So we're a very left brain society, and we're trained to be left brain. All the focus is on the left brain, getting things done and keeping things in order, and we're always stressed about the future and the past and not living in the moment. So if we can move over into the right brain, where admittedly you don't get quite as much done. There was a woman who was a brain surgeon she did brain research, I think, and she actually had a stroke where her left brain was paralyzed and she was only in the right brain, and she wrote a book about it called My Stroke of Insight. And so while she was in the right brain, it was wonderful, it was heavenly, sounds like a drug trip, but she couldn't really do anything. She couldn't focus enough to actually get work done, but it was a wonderful experience. So it seems to me we've lost that wonderful experience, and we're all in the left side, get the work done, particularly get the work done for somebody else, some big corporation that wants us to work. And what we need is the balance between the left and the right, and that's what makes us fulfill our potential as human beings.
Absolutely. That's the way we're going to evolve and not just reinvigorate those instinctual and intuitive capacities, but actually evolve into some sort of, as you said, idealized ESP community where we're much more aligned to some of the other frequencies that exist all around us. But look, it's one of those things that there are so many people who are thinking and acting holistically, Ellen. We're not all sucked into left brain thinking. Some of us have emancipated ourselves. There are many people who are leading the way in the development that we really all need to be doing personally for ourselves. We need to learn how to heal ourselves. We need to learn how to grow ourselves. We need to face our bullshit. We need to face our external and internal deceptions and lies and all the rest of it that disconnect us from more to information that is more aligned to the truth. And that is all of our responsibility. Each and every single one of us should be, and I obviously focus a lot on this sort of stuff, Ellen, trying to help people to step into their authenticity, to step into their healing. It's so important that we do take responsibility. I know I've seen so many circumstances as with a history as a social worker and just in general life where people are still sort of focused on some sort of trauma that happened so many years ago, and they blame that. I call it blameism, where they blame that particular thing for all the problems in their life, when all I've witnessed is all this self-inflicted trauma. 99% of their trauma is self-inflicted, it's self-abuse, but they still want to blame the system or some parent or something that happened as a kid, but they've perpetuated that trauma, they've amplified that dysfunction, and they've caused themselves more and more grief without realizing that they are a sovereign being who needs to step into themselves and become and go through a process of, which is a never-ending process of transformation, of healing, and of growth. It is so important that people accept this. And as all those quotes that get shared about social media say, you've got to look internally and heal the selves and grow the selves, and then project that out into the world. The emission and attraction of electromagnetic and subtle energies into the greater grid is a real process, and that it's something that we should be conscious of as we move through the healing and growth that we need on a personal level. We're doing this as a collective thing as well. Now, I think we're going over the hour. I think I would like to wrap this up with I think a question that a lot of people might have had on their mind when we were talking about the cryptocurrency conference and your experience with that. Was there any cryptocurrencies that you'd like to mention or that were mentioned at that conference that were new ICOs or new tokens, whatnot, that are focused on this peer-to-peer banking, decentralized sort of monetary exchange system?
Well, in truth, I spent so much time preparing, I didn't attend the whole conference, but I have read some that are very interesting that are peer-to-peer. Holochain is one. Arthur Brock's cryptocurrency. There's one called Bancor, which is Bernard Lietaer was a central banker from Belgium, who has written a lot about community currencies. And so his issue has always been, how can you get community currencies to trade with each other? As long as you're in the community, you trust the other people in your community, but you're not going to trust people on the other side of the world, which is one of the good things about Bitcoin, that it is, the money transfers automatically, so you don't have to trust them. It's called trustless. So how do you get community currencies to talk to each other, which are on this credit and debit system, rather than dig it out of the ground and then track it from one place to another in perpetuity, which is very cumbersome, expensive, and slow. So they are coming up with such systems. I know that Ripple, which is the man who originated Ripple, was actually originally a community currency guy in Canada, trying to get community currencies to talk to each other, and he decided it couldn't be done. So he decided to do something useful. So he actually sold his system to banks. So they are using the Ripple system. There are two versions of it who are now suing each other, apparently, over millions of dollars because the Ripple people gave, well, let's see, there's XRP, which is a coin in the Ripple system. I forget what the name of the other, anyway, the group that are the bankers, the Ripple people are suing them because they got an option. This is a long story, but anyway, so it's found its way into the banks, and it's definitely makes banking much more efficient, much faster. If there's talk of central bank digital currencies that would ideally, assuming we actually had a central bank that we could trust, that was actually working for us, that would get back the power to create money for the people, if it were actually a people's bank. Right now, only 5% of the money supply is actually created by the central bank. And so if it were a digital currency, if they opened up their lending window and their deposit window to people generally, they could recover that power that we lost to the big banks, the power that the American colonies originally have, and that I think, like the Commonwealth Bank of Australia did, where they just issued the money. So anyway, there's a lot of promising things out there. I'm sure there are others. There's some that are doing a UBI by cryptocurrency. There's one called Grant Coin, and there are several others. So all very promising. Interestingly, I'll just say one more thing. In California, the reason we have this big push now for a state-owned bank is because they want the cannabis tax money. Supposedly, cannabis will be legal for everyone, or they'll actually open the dispensaries on January 1st. And everybody's worried because this is predicted to be a $7 billion business, and $1 billion would go to taxes. But as long as it's all in cash, as it is now, because everything else is illegal, to go through the federal banking system is illegal. So they don't know how to keep track of that money. Plus, you have the people coming in with their big bags full of cash that smells of cannabis going into the bank and so forth. So it's a big issue. So they think public banking is a way they might get around that. Although I actually have my doubts. I think they have to change things at the federal level. But it's cool for us in the public banking community that there's this big push, which ironically is coming from the cannabis, the change in the cannabis laws.
Wow, so that's amazing. The sovereignty of medicine is leading to the sovereignty of money. Love it.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many potential solutions in the crypto world, in the public banking world, and in just general permaculture processes, the way that people are sort of as you said, undertaking self-realization processes, including self-reliance, which is growing your own food and helping community food sovereignty and food systems being developed. There's so many beautiful people in our world. It is so inspiring. We get saturated by fear-based bullshit through the media, and we forget that there are so many wonderful solutions and people who are actually doing action in the world, not just sitting behind the computer and having a whinge about how the system works. You touched quickly on Dennis Miller, who ran the Commonwealth Bank of Australia back, I think it was from memory, 1910 to 1923 or 24, something like that. You mentioned in our previous interview that the Commonwealth Bank of Australia at that time was the best example of a true central bank that has ever existed, where they created the money out of nothing. They lent it out for infrastructure projects, and I think to fund World War I, which obviously that's debatable whether or not that should have happened. But regardless, it was the model that created money out of nothing, which actually produced productivity, got that credit out into the community, and actually had a beneficial effect. So is that still the case? Is the Commonwealth Bank model between those years before Dennis Miller died supposedly by a heart attack at the age of around 50, and suddenly the Commonwealth Bank of Australia was reabsorbed back into the English banking system? So there's a bit of conspiratorial thinking that might be able to apply to that circumstance. But is that still the model that we should be looking for a central bank?
Yes, that would essentially be what, the Bank of England is now talking about a cryptocurrency that they would use to issue money, and this would allow them to open up their deposit windows to everyone. So, and then the problem is that then they say, well, how would the banks get the deposits to lend? Of course, they're presuming the banks need the deposits to lend. But if they also opened up their lending window, they would essentially be a central bank for everyone, issuing credit to, freely, like credit that's just created on their books. They don't have to pretend to be borrowing it from somewhere else like private banks have to. And then when they this overnight, borrowing from the shadow banking system and then giving it back the next day, which is obviously just sleight of hand, when they don't have to do that, because they can just admit, okay, we're just creating credit. That's all this is about. We create credit for you. You can go out and do with it as you will, and do something constructive and pay the credit back. And that keeps the system sustainable. I wouldn't say it's the first, because the American colonists, of course, did that, where they issued their own money, in that case it was paper money. And the Pennsylvania model, which was the best of the American colonist models, they had a bank, which was a land bank, that did the same. Like, basically the government printed the money, then they lent it to the farmers, and then they could print some extra, so there was enough out there for the interest, so it all come back as principal and interest, and then they could do that over and over, and it was a totally sustainable system. They didn't need taxes to run the government. They didn't have inflation, and they didn't have to borrow. So a very sustainable, ideal system, like the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. I think it was from 1912 to 1923.
Right. And that's one of the arguments against this sort of process, is that it's unsustainable. It will cause hyperinflation. So if there's an actual, examples out there where it has shown that it doesn't result with those issues, then we should be looking at the independent media, and the sovereignty community, so to speak, should really be looking into these potentials a lot more, in my opinion. I know I said I was going to wrap it up earlier, but I just thought I'd ask you, are there any examples of a community bank in a small town community that just services that community or that region? They undertake this process of money creation for the benefit of their community only. Is there some examples you can point us towards that exist right now?
Well, that's what community currencies do. They're not issued by the local government. They're issued by local groups, but that is what they do. But that I think it wasn't the Catalonians that were issuing they have a major community currency. And in Berlusconi, I guess, the former prime minister of Italy is proposing that Italy should issue its own currency. to get out of this debt trap that they're in. And they may have to do, I mean, it sounds like a great idea to me. The concern is that, of course, they're going to bump up against the euro, and the EU says that the euro is the only official currency. I mean, that's a problem with any government doing it. Like in the US, the states are not allowed to issue their own currencies, but they can do local private community currencies, which is often done, and it does work quite well, but then it's not the sole currency either. They also use the national currency. I guess the Swiss beer is a good example, which is a community currency. It's probably the largest, most established community currency, where they have big projects that are for, you know, I think I actually went to, my daughter lives in Switzerland, so I went to a spa that was built with beer, and it was, I think, I forget the numbers, but it seems to me it was like $500,000 worth of beer and then $1 million worth of Swiss francs.
Yeah, wow. So there is, from memory, I think I read there was about 50 local currencies in America. That was probably about a year ago. Is that about right? Because you very rarely hear about them.
Well, I don't know the number, but there are a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So look, we've talked about banking, public banking, what's going on in that world, the potential for a basic income, and the suppression of natural medicines, and the general approach of creating some left brain robots, minions of the system that don't really question the status outside of the box. They only question within the box. But you know, there is such a huge suspicion by the alternative community when it comes to governments and their actions, and that is obviously more than warranted. But I was just having a discussion yesterday with a primary school teacher who was saying there is a big push to roll out gardens within schools within our state, and that's an amazing approach. Apparently it's not just local, it is more on a statewide level. I'd have to look into that, but to hear that from a teacher was definitely inspiring, and a teacher who actually understands a lot of what we're talking about right now. As well as I've got a friend from one of my old stomping grounds where she told me that their preschool was introducing meditation for the kids and more mindfulness practices. So there are some actions that are happening through governmental initiatives that show that there are people thinking, you know, critically and thinking progressively about some of these issues. So that's definitely a bit inspiring. We shouldn't forget that. We shouldn't write off everybody who works in the political or the bureaucratic spectrum, even though a lot should be, and we should be critically analysing behaviours and connections and corruptions and all the rest of it. But we should also celebrate the goodness, because there are good people doing some great stuff, both through governmental mechanisms and privately as well. But we've talked about those issues. Ellen, is there something important that you really that we've missed that you really want to talk about before we go?
Well, I don't think so. I'll just say, when I was in grade school in the 1950s in Michigan, we had a garden. Gardening was part of our schooling. There were gardens, so that was cool. And I'll just, if I may, just mention my book, The Public Bank Solution, talks all about the Commonwealth Bank of Australia and the whole progression of the development of the central banking system as a way, the international central banking system as a way to suppress individual central banks that would issue their own money on the Australian model. And you had mentioned that Web of Debt was a novel, but it's actually nonfiction. I tried to write it like a novel, but it's nonfiction. It's true. So those are my two main books, and I'm working on a third.
That's awesome. And I guess so.
10 other books on health and alternative healthcare.
Right. Yeah, well, I guess when I get on my rants, sometimes words get slippery, and you just
I listen to things and I say, "Oh dear, did I say that?"
yeah. Oh, I try not to listen back to the interviews. I just let it go. It is what it is. That's the energy of the moment. I've either nailed certain things or I haven't. It is what it is. All right, Ellen, you're a superhuman, mate. You're the example of where we're going. We're an
Oh
enlightened
no,
consciousness.
you're the young people. We love the young people coming up, bringing up the troops have arrived. The cavalry has arrived.
Yes, well, there's a lot of the younger millennials generations that are stuck in this left-right duopoly. They're in this neoliberal, highly politicized, highly politically correct society. Everyone's sensitive. No one knows what sex they are. There's a lot of absolute distractions and psychological operations that are really causing so much idiocy within our younger generations. Let's call it what it is, including within the New Age movement, which has been co-opted into a passive, inactive process where people are trying to kill their own personalities. It's a bit of an embarrassment on certain levels, but it's also an amazing opportunity on other levels. This is the dance of dichotomies. We are in an incarnation right now, which is at the forefront of duality, of this left-right, dark light, love, fear, program construct that we call the third dimensional reality, being a human on this so-called planet. And not to offend the flat earthers out there, but on our planet in some sort of weird universe where these subtle connections can reinvigorate the magic that we all are made of. But I have so much faith in humanity. We are at a crossroads, or should I say a fork in the road. Which way are we going to choose? Are we going to choose control or freedom? The masses have been programmed to choose control right now. They are facilitating the further underminement, if that's even a word, of freedom, of sovereignty, of empowerment. We are looking at centralization, but on a planetary scale. But the globalists, I don't know if they're that as powerful as some people in the conspiratorial world would like to believe. I think there's so many good people out there, and we certainly don't have pedophiles. Everybody's not a pedophile. I know there's a lot of issues when it comes to the satanic and pedophilic tendencies that do exist in not just the upper echelons in society, but right through our society. That needs to be talked about, needs to be exposed, but we also need to look at the beauty that people do have as well. And I think we are strong. There are more good hearts in our world than there are bad ones, and we just need mechanisms to unite on to really work out how we're going to share the information to get us at the cutting edge of what's really going on in the world, as well as to implement the solutions, the many potential solutions that do exist. So I've got a lot of faith in it. You reinvigorate my faith, Ellen, because you're really offering some really good evidence-based solutions for how we can start actually moving forward and taking back our sovereignty and building a future that is just, is honourable, is based in virtues and principles that benefit all of us, so including our natural systems too. So Ellen, thank you so much for your time. It's a pleasure to chat with you. I can't wait to do this again. Let's not wait so long next time.
Okay, it was great talking to you as well. Thank you.
No worries at all, and I look forward to getting an update as the crypto community and the other sort of sovereign communities start thinking about other potential solutions and how they respond to your article as well.
Thank you very much.
You take care, Ellen.
You too. Bye.